Hey, 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 Clean. Hope you're doing good, bud. Uh, I am going to do a little bit on covering the Gaza deal, um, the ceasefire. I need to, so let me bring this one thing up. As many people know, I do multiple sources, so I am going to first cover the Al Jazeera side of things. If I can open it up. Hey, Freddie. So, what do we know about this is from Al Jazeera. So, obviously, this is going to have a specific bent. Take with that what you will. I will go with the other side of the bent here in a few minutes. What do we know about the Israel Hamas ceasefire deal in Gaza? Gaza ceasefire agreed, including prisoner exchange and aid surge, after more than 460 days of conflict. By the Al Jazeera staff on 15 January 2025. Israel and Palestinian group Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire deal with Israel. Qatar and the United States have said more than at 460 days of a war that has devastated Gaza. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman bin Jassim Al Thani said on Wednesday that the ceasefire deal would come into effect on Sunday, but added that work on implementation steps with Israel and Hamas was continuing. There's some debate about controlling interests and stuff like that, mechanics, and Netanyahu has said he would not take it to the floor until it had a complete deal put together. Sorry, fire trucks. So Israel says that some final details remain, and an Israeli government vote is expected today, Thursday. Israel has killed more than 46,000 Palestinians since its war on the enclave began in October 2023. What's up, Boston? Um, you can look at an analysis of what you can feel about that how you will. I'm not gonna delve into that water. Um, the deal includes a temporary ceasefire that will, for now, bring an end to destruction visited upon Gaza, as well as the release of captives held in Gaza and many of the prisoners held by Israel. The deal will also finally allow displaced Palestinians to return to their homes. Though after Israel's deliberate destruction campaign, many homes no longer remain. The first phase, the initial phase, thanks, Clean. I think it's important. I'm trying to keep my national zeal for my home, my second country, out of it. So I'll try to be a fair arbiter. So the initial phase will last 6 weeks and will involve a limited perimeter prisoner exchange, the partial withdrawal of troops in Gaza, and a surge in aid into the enclave. Now, the problem with aid, right, is Gaza is trading the aid for guns, wet bullets, other weapons. They're paying soldiers with it. They're paying other terrorist organizations with it. Um, then they're charging the general populace exorbitant amounts of extortion to get any food to the general public. It's what we saw in Somalia. It's what we saw in many other conflict zones around the world. So 33 captives, including women, children, and civilians over the age of 50, taken during the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on October 7th, will be released in exchange. Israel will release a large number of Palestinian prisoners during this phase, including prisoners serving life sentences. What they do not say here is that a lot of them are convicted murderers that are not part of the terrorist organization. They're just convicted murderers. Among the Palestinians being released are around 1,000 who were detained after October 7th. In tandem with the exchange of captives, Israel will withdraw its forces from Gaza's population centers to areas no more than 700 meters inside Gaza's border with Israel. However, that may exclude Netzraim corridor, the militarized belt bisecting the strip and controlling movement along it. The withdrawal from Netzraim is expected to take place in stages. Israel will allow civilians to return to their homes in the enclave's besieged north, where aid agencies warn famine may have taken hold, and allow a surge of aid into the conclave, up to 600 trucks per day. Hey, Lucy. Israel will also allow wounded Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip for treatment and open the Rafah crossing with Egypt 7 days after the start of the implementation of the first phase. Israeli forces will reduce their presence in the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt and Gaza, and then withdraw completely no later than the 50th day after the deal comes into effect. The problem is right now there's no deal on governance. They're just saying, bleh, here's the land back. We're going to pull back. We're going to create another security risk for ourselves, Israel. Um, and nobody's talking about how it's going to be governed, how it's going to be protected, or anything else like that. What happens next? Oh, after the first phase. Details of the second and third phases, though understood to be agreed into in principle, are to be negotiated during the first phase. President Biden has said that the ceasefire will continue even if the negotiations on the second and third phases go beyond the initial 6 weeks of the first phase. Critically, Israel has insisted that no written guarantees be given to rule out a resumption of its attacks once the first phase is complete and its civilian captives returned. However, according to an Egyptian source cited by the Associated Press news agency, the three mediators involved in the talks, Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, have given Hamas verbal guarantees that negotiations will continue and that all three would press for a deal that would see the second and third phases implemented before an initial 6 week window has elapsed. Now, I will give, and I am happy that Bibi is not involved in these talks because he always gets huffy and walks out, blows it up, and messes things up. He is a bit self-entitled. So what is planned for the second phase? If it is determined that the conditions have been met for a second phase, Hamas will release all the remaining living captives, mostly male soldiers, in return for freeing more Palestinians held in Israeli prison system. In addition, according to the current document, Israel would initiate its complete withdrawal from Gaza. However, these conditions, which have yet to be voted upon by the Israeli cabinet, are at odds with the stated position of many of the far right wing members of Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's cabinet, which he relies on for support, as well as Netanyahu's own past positions, which he has repeatedly used in the presence of Hamas in Gaza to prolong the conflict. Third phase. The third phase, the details of a third phase remain unclear. Should the conditions of the second stage be met, the third phase will see the bodies of the remaining captives handed over in return for a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan to be conducted under international supervision. I don't know if this is bodies of those we already know are deceased, or we're going to find out that many more hostages are deceased than previously thought. But we will see. That that sentence kind of bothered me. There is currently no agreement over who will administer Gaza beyond the ceasefire. The United States has pressed for a reformed version of the Palestinian Authority to do so. Secretary Blinken said on Thursday, the post-war reconstruction and governance envisions the Palestinian Authority inviting international partners to stand up an interim governing authority to run critical services and to oversee the territory. Other partners, notably Arab states, would provide forces to ensure security in the short term, he said in a speech at the Atlantic Council, a Washington-based think tank. For such a plan to work, it would need the support of the Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, which have said they would only support the scheme if there's a pathway to Palestinian statehood, which I agree there should be Palestinian statehood, but terrorist organizations should not be run in Palestine. Putting other Arab states boots on the ground for security after giving up other territory, I think, is a mistake. But we'll see what happens. This provides another point of contention for Israeli lawmakers. Despite Israel having agreed to a two-state solution in the Oslo Accords of 1990s, Israel has yet to suggest an alternative form of governance in Gaza. So the source is Al Jazeera. Was Al Jazeera on the 15th? Here's the title. What do we know about the Israel Hamas ceasefire deal in Gaza? You can look it up if if any of the people who don't like me are watching. So let us go to the other opinion. Well, I mean, another view. I don't know that it's another opinion per se. Oh my. Okay, Lucy, be well. So let's see what first let me
Hey, everyone. Huge news today. We are closer to a ceasefire hostage deal between Hamas and Israel than we've ever been. The Americans are pressuring Israel and Hamas. The negotiations are in full swing out in Qatar. We're going to make sense of all of this for you, give you all the details about what is and is not in the deal, and make sure you stick around to the end of this video where we're going to talk about the reasons why this deal might still fall through. But first, let's take a look at the report from Tamir Morag, political correspondent on Channel 14 cable news in Israel.
העסקה מדברת על כך שבשלב הראשון יפוקרו עד 30.
Can y'all see the subtitles since you can't understand his Hebrew? I'll assume for most of you. Hey, no man. If not, I'll turn the sound down and I'll read them. We'll let you. We'll go with the.
63 חטופים ישראלים שמוגדרים כהומניטריים, זאת אומרת נשים, ילדים, גברים מעל גיל 50 וחטופים שמצבם הבריאותי ירוד. בנוסף לזה כלולים בהגדרה של החטופים ההומניטריים, גם שני החטופים שנחטפו בעזה לפני המלחמה, שהפוסייד והסרט הנגיסטו. בתמורה לזה ישראל אמורה לשחרר 1,000, אפילו יותר מ1,000 מחבלים, מתוכם לפחות כ200 רוצחים שנידונו למאסרי עולם או לתקופות מאסר מאוד ממושכות. הרוצחים ישוחררו לא ליהודה ושומרון, אלא לרצועת עזה או למדינה שלישית, כמו אלג'יריה, קטר או משהו בסגנון הזה. הפסקת האש תיקח כחודש וחצי בשלב הראשון, כאשר ביום ה-19 מתחילת העסקה יתחילו לדון באופן פרטני בשלב השני, שבו אמורים להשתחרר יתר החטופים, ובתוך כדי השלב הראשון ישראל תבצע נסיגות משמעותיות ברצועת עזה, אבל לא תיסוג מהרצועה לחלוטין. תצומצם הנוכחות בציר פילדלפי, אבל צה"ל עדיין יישאר שם בכוחות מדוללים, ובנוסף לזה צה"ל יישאר בפרימטר שמסביב לרצועה. לגבי חזרת עזתים לצפון הרצועה, אז תותר חזרה בכל הגילים, כאשר זה יעשה דרך נקזים לאורך ציר נצרים שבהם יערכו בדיקות ביטחוניות, אבל הבדיקות האלה לא יערכו על ידי כוחות צה"ל, אלא על ידי איזשהו גורם שלישי ניטרלי עם אמצעי פיקוח של ישראל. זה בגדול, אלה הקווים הכלליים של המתווה המדובר.
So let's sum up.
So, I mean, that went pretty fast, but in essence, it's everything I was reading from the Al Jazeera deal, right? The elderly, over 50, sick, children first to be released, and then Israel releases 1,000 convicts. Lots of them arrested October 7th and beyond. Some convicted murderers, all serving life sentences.
Up what is in this deal. First stage of the deal, 33 hostages will be released, but they're not all going to be released on day one. Will include women, children, and men who are ill or have some injury that is significant. This will also include 2 hostages that were actually taken before October 7th. It will begin 48 hours after the signing of the deal with the release just of the women who are not military, because some of the women who are being held hostages are Israeli soldiers. The rest of the 33 hostages will trickle out every few days over the 6 weeks of this stage 1 of the deal, so over 42 days. In exchange, Israel's going to release over 1,000 terrorists. This includes over 200 murderers. These murderers will not include any terrorists who participated in the October 7th massacre. Israel is also insisting that the murderers who are released and the more senior terrorists who are released not be allowed into Judea and Samaria, but that they be sent either to the Gaza Strip or to a different country. And the suggested countries.
Preference, in my opinion, would be another country. Just get them out of the region. I mean, I hate it, but no, I don't hate it. They're fucking terrorists and murderers. So.
Are Algeria, Qatar, Iran, or the like. Regarding residents of Gaza,
they would be more isolated in Qatar.
Returning to the northern part, because the residents of the northern part of Gaza have mostly been evacuated to the south. Residents will be allowed to return to the north, and this is a big concession from Israel. They're allowing all residents to return to the north with no restriction on age or sex. And that means we're going to have hundreds of thousands of Gazans returning to the northern part.
There's an important point coming up here. I want to see if you catch it, about what they don't know as they're allowing people unrestricted to go back into Gaza.
Part of the Gaza Strip, including fighting aged males. The security check of those returning will not be done by the IDF. It'll be done by a neutral third party, but Israel will have some measure of oversight. After the first 16 days of this stage 1, negotiations will begin for stage 2. Now, stage 2 will involve the release of all remaining Israeli hostages. And it should be noted that Israel will not fully withdraw its forces from the Gaza Strip until every single hostage is returned. Israeli forces will remain in a perimeter, in a security perimeter surrounding the Gaza Strip to defend the Israeli towns. The IDF will also retain forces along what's called the Philadelphia corridor. That's the border between Gaza and Egypt, and that's a very contentious spot because that's where all the border crossings between Gaza and Egypt are, and as we discovered, a number of significant tunnels where most of the weapons and equipment were smuggled in through these tunnels with the assistance of Egyptian officials. Key point in this deal is that Israel...
Oh no, Todd, I thought it was the Jews who used tunnels.
Israel is insisting that this ceasefire not be final because Israel's primary war aim is to defeat Hamas, to destroy both their military and government.
So let's have a separation here of Gaza and the Palestinians, civilians, and a region that would be a nice place for a Palestinian state, and Hamas, a third-party terrorist organization. You can argue why they're there, why they're not there. They're still terrorists. They conduct terrorist operations all over the world. So they're
governing capabilities. And it's even been reported that the Israelis have asked the Americans for guarantees that they will support them on this point for the war to be able to continue, although this is not confirmed. But it's also a political issue. If Prime Minister Netanyahu agrees to a deal that includes the ending of the war with Hamas still in a governing capacity in the Gaza Strip, that Hamas is not completely destroyed as a military and governing entity, it will be the end of Prime Minister Netanyahu's political career. Everyone, left and right, will attack him for backtracking on his commitments. The government will almost certainly fall, and he will be viewed as someone who failed in his stated war aims. But at the same time, Hamas might agree to this because Hamas is desperate right now, more desperate than they've ever been at any point in the war. One thing that's gone unreported in Western media is that Hamas is running out of ammunition. I'm talking to the level of bullets. They are running out of ammunition. The ammunition factories that they had built themselves in the Gaza Strip have almost entirely been destroyed and captured by the Israelis. And the border crossings to Egypt, that's been closed off and controlled by the Israelis. So Hamas is now being choked out. They cannot continue to fight this war. They're having trouble getting ammunition. They're also under a lot of pressure from the fact that the Iranian regime is on its back foot and weakened, and Hezbollah has basically been taken off the table. And also you have Qatar. These negotiations are taking place in Qatar. The Qataris very much want to be engaged with the United States. The Biden administration had very warm relations with.
Clean, did you do your mid-tour in Qatar or R&R time in Qatar? Qatar is a more westernized Muslim country, so they definitely want good relations with the United States. Did I say hey to me, you, Misty and Justin? If not, hello.
With Qatar, Biden called Qatar an ally. And the Trump administration has been signaling that if Qatar continues to support terrorism, there are going to be consequences. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance said as much in an interview just the other day that what Donald Trump meant by his threats to bring hell down on everyone involved if there isn't a deal by the time he comes into office, that he was signaling those Arab states that give support to terrorists. And they were obviously pointing the finger at Qatar in this. So the Qataris it's very important to them to show good faith to the Americans and to show that they are not on the side of the bad guys. And they're going to be pressuring very hard. They're going to be pressuring Hamas to accept a deal here. To sum things up, We have a hostage deal, a ceasefire deal, but the big sticking point, the big reason why this deal still has a good chance of falling through is if Hamas comes back and says that they'll only agree to it if the war comes to an end. And that, as I said, is something that the Israelis cannot agree to under any circumstances. Please subscribe to this channel, stay on top of what's going on. We're going to continue to bring you breaking stories, especially those items that are not making it out into Western media that have to do with Israel and the Middle East. Hey, everyone.
I got uno mas on this. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you seem really knowledgeable about the stuff, and we talked to so many vets, Clayton, that for some reason I thought you had been deployed. But let's see. Okay, one more. Present. What a terrible pause face. Sorry, Rabbi. Clean, I think once you get the chance, you would enjoy some world travel. Indeed. I miss it. Get this last one out of college and I'll be able to do it again. Okay, so the rabbi is going to go over a few more things. He's going to put up some maps. So I think that this is a good follow-up.
By now, everyone knows that there's apparently a hostage/ceasefire deal, although as of this recording on Thursday morning, just an hour ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office issued a statement saying that Hamas is still trying to change some things in the deal and that he will not bring it before the cabinet until he gets a final answer from them. But in all likelihood, the deal is going forward. If you haven't yet watched our previous video, which gives the details of this deal, go and watch that first and then come back to this video, because we're going to assume that you know the details based on that video. But the bottom line is that this hostage deal, this ceasefire deal, is an absolute disaster for Israel and makes Hamas the winner of this war. Let me explain. According to this deal, Hamas maintains and even strengthens its governing control over the Gaza population. The humanitarian aid that has been surging into the Gaza Strip ever since the Biden-Blinken administration has been forcing Israel to deliver massive quantities of humanitarian aid into areas under Hamas control, that increases with this deal. This aid goes right into the hands of Hamas. They then sell it back to the population at exorbitant prices, but they also use it as leverage for recruitment. They'll give it to families that give their sons to fight for Hamas. They use it to pay the members of Hamas, and they use the fuel, which is a big part of the humanitarian aid. It's not all sandwiches and milk. There's a lot of fuel in the humanitarian aid that all is commandeered by Hamas, and they use it to rebuild their war machine. Let me explain why it's going to get worse. The infrastructure in northern Gaza has been completely destroyed. There's no regular economic life there, which means the only real source of income, the only real source of food and basic resources is going to be Hamas, giving them a full stranglehold on the population. This deal, once again, strengthens all of that for Hamas. Now, without the Israelis hunting them and attacking them, without a current war going on with Israel, it will make it even easier for them to use the profits from the aid and rebuild more effectively. Early in the war, Israel evacuated the population of the northern towns, for the most part, the civilians from the northern towns, hundreds of thousands of them, into the southern part of Gaza and set up a border that cuts through the middle of Gaza called the Netzarim corridor. According to this deal, Israel surrenders control of the Netzarim corridor and allows the population to return to northern Gaza.
So you got the Philadelphia corridor down south that covers Egypt, and then the Netzarim. And so one of the deal parts was the 200 terrorists that took part in can't go back around Jabalia.
Restrictions on age or sex. Now, the IDF has still not located all of the weapons stores in northern Gaza, which means
very important point. We haven't found all of the weapon stores in Gaza, and there's going to be a no restriction, go back home order, even military age males. And remember, Israel is not going to be part of, they're not going to be the primary on the security checks.
Means that Hamas and these fighting age males are going to be able to go back there and get their weapons and get what they left behind. But even without that, this return of this massive civilian population makes it far more difficult, even impossible, for Israel to resume the war. Israel has been maintaining throughout these negotiations, and in all of the reports you've seen, Israel maintains that this deal is not an end to the war, that we still reserve the right to continue the war, and they're telling that to the Israeli public. Don't worry, the initial aims of the war to destroy Hamas's military and governing capability, these aims remain intact. But if you really look at what's happening in this deal, what's going to happen if Israel decides to resume the war? They're going to evacuate them all again? Just imagine what that's going to look like in world media. Further, with Israel's security problems from this deal, according to Appendix 1 of the agreement, Israel will gradually reduce its presence during the 42 days of Phase 1, will reduce its presence along the Philadelphia corridor. That's the border between Gaza and Egypt. And after Stage 1, will complete a full withdrawal from that corridor no later than day 50. That's 8 days after Phase 1. This deal brings us back to the situation before October 7th, where Israel relies on the Egyptians for our security in the Gaza Strip. Now, what the Egyptians were doing is aiding and abetting Hamas in the smuggling in through underground tunnels and through the various crossings in the Philadelphia corridor, smuggling in all of the supplies they needed to build their whole terror infrastructure. All of the weapons, all of the missiles they had came across the border crossing in Rafah, which is on the Philadelphia corridor. And according to this deal, Israel surrenders control of the Philadelphia corridor, first gradually drawing down during the first 6 weeks. And then if we go to Stage 2 of this deal, Israel withdraws completely. This compromises Israel's security long-term in a way that is unconscionable. Now, let's look ahead at what the return to northern Gaza will look like in Western media. And this is something that nobody is talking about regarding this deal. Let's just imagine we have these hundreds of thousands of Gazans returning to these destroyed cities where almost every building has been destroyed. Soldiers that I've spoken to in combat have talked about how going house to house, every single home in the Gaza Strip, every single apartment building has weapons stores in it, has rocket launchers. We all know about the hospitals and schools that have been used by Hamas as bases of operation. And that's why all these buildings are destroyed. What's going to happen now is
this is again, if you listen to our series on America's Longest Wars, right? You end up with these moral dilemmas, right? When terrorists hide their or use human civilians as shields. And oh man, this is this geopolitical mess over there, right? Yeah, Kelly, it is. It's going to be at least a decade of rebuilding if there's no hindrances.
That with a ceasefire in place, Hamas is going to invite the worldwide media in to see the destruction. And there's going to be all kinds of pictures of people weeping over their homes, of women crying, of bodies being pulled from the rubble, bodies, of course, that were only in harm's way because Hamas insisted on using them as human shields and putting them into legitimate military targets. The pictures and the narratives that are going to come out of the northern part of the Gaza Strip are going to cause tremendous damage to Israel. If we've seen an onslaught of anti-Israel propaganda since October 7th, this ceasefire deal is only going to make that situation way, way worse. This is not really a deal for 33 hostages. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, we don't know how many of these hostages are alive and how many are dead. Most of these hostages are only...
Let's remember the third phase, right? The third phase in that paragraph said, return the bodies of the remaining captives. It didn't say return the captives. And that was from Al Jazeera, not a pro-Israel news source.
Going to be released in the final days of the deal. And negotiations for phase 2, which is supposed to see the release of all remaining Israeli hostages, they're all supposed to be released in phase 2. And the negotiations, the terms of the deal of phase 2 are set to begin 16 days into this deal. Now, according to this deal, here's how the release of hostages goes. The first 3 hostages are going to be released 2 days into the deal. A week into the deal, 4 more hostages are released, and then 3 hostages will be released per week through week 6, brings the number to 19. And then the final 14 hostages will be released at the end of the 42 days. That means, bottom line, is that the negotiations for phase 2 are set to begin 16 days into phase 1. Only 10 of the hostages will have been released at that point. What happens if the negotiations break down? What happens if Hamas starts making demands at that point that Israel can't live with? Is there any incentive for Hamas to keep releasing more hostages all the way till the end of the deal? So it's entirely likely that all the 33 that we're talking about won't even be released. Let's assume now that the negotiations are ongoing. Well, according to this deal, so long as the negotiations are ongoing, Israel does not resume its hostilities, does not resume the war, because the Israelis maintain that this deal does not mean an end to the war, that they still reserve the right to continue fighting Hamas to destroy their military and governing capabilities. Well, what happens at the end of 42 days if they're still negotiating? Hamas has an incentive to keep those negotiations going forever and ever. What's more, Hamas has zero incentive to come to an agreement that releases all the Israeli hostages in stage 2. If Israel insists that its war aims of destroying Hamas's military and governing capabilities are still intact, that they still reserve the right to resume that, why would Hamas ever release the final hostages? It's the only leverage they have over Israel, which means that in the only way for Hamas to agree to release all the hostages is a situation where they do retain power in Gaza, they do retain their military and governing capabilities. Otherwise, it's going to break down. This deal dooms the remaining hostages to never be released or for Hamas to fully retain its governing capabilities to continue to be the governing authority in the Gaza Strip. Either way you slice it, this means that Hamas wins the war and Israel loses. Hamas.
Remember, as I said when starting this, right? No matter what happens I feel like that Hamas should never be allowed to be the ruling party in Palestine. Israel will forever oppose a Palestinian state as long as you had the PLO that turned into Hamas. As long as there's a terrorist organization leading, then I don't see how that there's going to be a peace.
Hamas controls so significant portions of Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. If you haven't seen our video on the civil war going on internally among the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, go and watch that video and you'll understand a little more what I'm talking about. When these 7...
Did anybody know that there was a civil war going on between those two?
1,700 terrorists are released. According to the deal, some of them will be going to Judea and Samaria, and some of them will be going to the Gaza Strip. Either way, this not only reinforces the ranks of Hamas, but it also gives them a massive PR win for their population. When these prisoners start coming home, you are going to see footage, and we'll bring some of it to you, of celebrations in the streets of these Arab towns, celebrating these terrorist murderers who are being released from Israeli prisons. It is going to be a Hamas victory celebration. The Israelis are adamant that this deal is not an end to the war, but how could they ever resume it? How could they go back into northern Gaza and evacuate everyone again? Internally in Israel right now, there is confusion. There is a lot of discomfort with this deal. People are asking questions. What about the aim of destroying Hamas as a governing body on our border? What about the change that we were told this war would bring? So many Israelis have sent their children into combat and lost their children in combat. My own children have been fighting in combat units in this war. What was it all for, if not to bring about a fundamental change where we no longer have a terrorist organization running a mini terror state on our border, threatening us and killing our people? This deal enriches Hamas financially, enabling them to stay in power, reinforce, and rebuild. It gives Hamas the opportunity to declare victory and be the hero to their public for the release of hundreds of terrorists who will also add to their ranks. It enables massive public relations wins for Hamas and the worldwide anti-Israel propaganda machine. It makes it far more difficult for Israel to resume the war. And let me add here that for the same reason that the incoming Trump administration was pressuring Israel into this deal, because they don't want any kinetic conflicts, they don't want any wars going on their watch, there will be significant pressure from the Trump administration preventing Israel from resuming the war should negotiations break down. You can bet on that. Finally, this deal most likely dooms the remaining hostages to never, ever be released.
There you have it. There's my update. Jicky, are you still here? Well, I mean, Justin, a stolen birthright. Kick that one off. That one. Here you go, Jicky, if you can see it. I'll give you a moment to see if you recognize. my daughter, when she was doing her study abroad in Amsterdam, got it at the Bulls distillery or Bulls. So, questions, comments? Yeah, I don't like Jen anyway. Well, I mean, if you do a what's the cup called? Dadgummit. Nah, I forget anyway. Anywho, any questions or comments before we head out into the wild and see you guys in a little bit? Gin is delicious. Oh man. If you like gin, Misty, what's the British it's a something cup? Dang it. Shuggy would know. Dang it, it's gonna drive me insane. Oh well. I'm already mostly insane anyway. Yeah, there's no wins, Jicky. There isn't. Two-state solution is the only solution in my mind. Putting a bunch of countries on the border, giving up land, was there with abides on Sinai side? Oh, Sinai. Was there UN? Are you meaning UN cap? I love the Golan Heights. Well, yeah, I mean, there was the UN mission we had in the 90s in Egypt. I can't remember. Really wasn't my area when I was doing my thing. As far as UN shit goes. Anywho, I will see you guys later. Y'all have a great day. I'll start off later with try to find something funny to watch before we get into more serious stuff again. So y'all be good.